great pleasure to welcome you to this very special evening session on behalf of the Turkish Academy of Management. Tonight, we are very pleased to host a scholar who has shaped the way we think about people and performance in organizations. Professor Fred Luthans. He is internationally recognized as the pioneer of positive organizational psychology, behavior, and the father of psychological capital, also known as Psycap. His work has played a key role in helping organizations focus more on people's strengths and potential, not just their weaknesses or shortcomings. His model, Psycap model, continues to guide leadership development, employee well-being, and positive organizational outcomes worldwide. So before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, you will be invited to ask your questions, either by using the raise hand button or typing them in the chat. And also, this session is being recorded. Ece, will you help us to record it, please? So that it will be shared on our official Turkish Academy of Management official YouTube channel. So it is truly my honor to introduce Professor Fred Luthans. He is the George Holmes Distinguished Professor of Management Emeritus at the University of Nebraska. With a career spanning over 5 decades, Professor Luthans served as the 41st president of the Academy of Management, and he has received numerous top awards, including the Distinguished Management Educator Award and the Distinguished Scholarly Contributions to Management Award. His work is highly cited, placing him among the top 1% of researchers globally across all fields in 2017. Professor Luthans' research has not only advanced scholarly understanding, but also has been successfully translated into real-world training and development programs that improve performance and well-being in organizations. So, Professor, thank you so much for being here. We are very excited to hear your insights. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And all of the participants, I apologize for not having this because we worked very hard to make sure that we didn't have any problems, but that's technology. Anyway, as I told Meral, I am very pleased to be able to have the opportunity to address all of you. And I just want to make sure that you understand that I'm doing this, gratis. I'm doing this because I want to continue to provide my psychological capital to the world. And as I was telling Meryl when we were getting this set up, I'm very pleased because my work has been international, more so than even in my own country of the United States. And I appreciate that because I think we are now in truly a global economy and a global management field. So I welcome this opportunity. Now, here is just some pictures of my background that I thought you might enjoy, starting where I got my undergraduate, MBA, and PhD at the University of Iowa. And that's where I'm born and raised. And I was on the track team at the University of Iowa. And you can see that I was a hurdler. So I was not a great hurdler, but I was a good hurdler. And I enjoyed my time at the university. The second picture, as we go clockwise here, I had my first date with my wife at the University of Iowa. And, 5 years later, she became my wife, and now we just are going to celebrate our 62nd years together anniversary next month on June 9th. Then after I graduated with my PhD, I had to go into the Army, and all my classmates went to Vietnam, but I was able to have a PhD and teach at the West Point Academy. And I think you all have heard of West Point, maybe. And anyway, that's where all the great generals of the United States Army went to school. And I was able to teach psychology and leadership at West Point, and that's my wife getting congratulated by a general at West Point. And then on the lower left side of these pictures, I then taught after getting out of the U.S. Army as a captain teaching at West Point. I was able to land my academic position at the University of Nebraska, which is right in the middle of the U.S. And we are a member of the Big Ten Conference, which Iowa is also in. Then the middle picture, not only did I teach then for 50 years at Nebraska and retired about 10 years ago, but still active, I gave this same kind of presentation to what is called China Mobile in Beijing, China. And throughout China, they have 500,000 employees. So I was in person there talking to the head of China Mobile, and you can see me talking mobily then to their employees throughout China. So I've done a lot of those kinds of things like I'm doing with you today. And then now my most recent one, though, as the far right there in the lower, was at Harvard Medical School. And I think you've all heard of Harvard being, the oldest university in the US and also the most prestigious. And I'm talking to the med school about the same things that you guys are going to get today. And they gave me an award for behavioral health, and I appreciated that. But just so you get a little picture of me growing up as well as my career. But by far the most important to me are not these publications and all, but are my wife Kay and my 4 kids, their spouses, and 8 grandkids. So that's my wife and I, and these are my family. And I think you can tell we have a lot of blondes. And this is on the North Shore of Hawaii. You've all heard of Hawaii. And this is on the North Beach of where Honolulu is, on the other side of Oahu, the island of Hawaii. So that's my family. And I'm very proud, most proud of that. So I hope you can see where my priorities lie, have always been my children and grandchildren. And I'm very proud of them. My 2 sons, the biggest one there, we'll talk to him in a minute, but he's a professor also. And then my son next to me on your right from me is my second son, and they're both professors. And all the rest of these kids are now teachers at grade school and high school. Now, I've always had this passion to conduct basic research and have evidence-based credibility. That's always been my kind of niche. I am not a consultant per se. I'm not a motivational speaker, which you've already probably guessed by now. I'm not a motivational speaker, but I am trying to get my niche by doing basic research and using evidence-based credibility that gives me, I hope, credibility in your eyes, as most of you are all professors. And here I've just taken a picture out of the Google Scholar indexes, and you can see that I have 176,000. That's growing every day. And I have an H index of 125, and you all know what that is, right? That means I have 125 articles with at least 125 or more citations. And then I have 310 on this I-10 index that Google puts together on Google Scholar on almost a daily basis. That means I have 310 articles that have at least 10 citations each. So I hope that gives me credibility for what I'm talking about with you to hear today. Now, I've had not only all these articles and citations from mostly the articles, but I have some major books that represent more or less the evolution of my career. So I started with what I consider to be the first textbook in organizational behavior. Then I did a whole part of my career, next part of my career in the 70s and 80s was in behavioral management, using operant conditioning and behavioral psychology into what I called OB mod, organizational behavior modification. Have that book and many research articles on that phase of my career. Then a phase that most of you don't know about is that I did a qualitative study of what do managers really do. And I did an observational research, took over, got a big grant from the US government to do it. And that ended up in a book. The problem with that, not many people know about that part of my career, is that this publisher that I have this book with went out of business right when my book came out. So it never got the exposure that I think it deserved. And many people still feel that that's some of my best work. So it's observational study of what do managers really do and what do successful managers do versus what do effective managers do, using an observational methodology to gather that data. And then my most recent and what we're talking about today is psychological capital. I coined that term, psychological capital, or then Psycap, Psycap, Psycap to represent this positive psychology approach or positive organizational behavior approach, which I feel I was the one that really started that. So I not only have these top tier articles, but the first books on the seminal concepts and research in these 4 areas that I just went through with you, starting with the whole field of organizational behavior. Like I said, that book on the left, that's the first textbook in the field. But my favorite book is the one I'm going to show you next. And that's Organizational Behavior, that textbook now in its actually 14th edition. And the reason it's my favorite is because my sons are now co-authors with me. And my son Brett on the left and my son Kyle on the right. And they're both full professors, both have PhD from Nebraska, not under me, but under our program here. And they both are doing excellent work and now co-author most of my things with me. Not only articles, but then I added them to they came on about the 11th or 12th edition of this, best-selling textbook at the time. So that's my 2 boys, which I'm very proud of. And the boy on the right, Kyle, he's the chairman of the management department at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. And in fact, on one of the participants today, he said she was signed up for this, was just joining his faculty there at Nebraska at Kearney. And her name is Lilac Lee. So hi, Lilac. And Kyle, I wanted to make sure I said hi to you because you had indicated that you were signing up for this webinar today.
Yes, nice to meet you.
There she is. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very honored. Thank you.
Yes, well, he's very excited to have you, believe me. And she's in the health side of organizational behavior, healthcare side, and that's a very rare skills to have. So thank you for joining us today. Now, here are my career phases that I've already indicated to you through these books that I had the first book in. And the common theme of all those 4 areas that I just went through with you, the common theme is positivity. So whether that be the first phase, which is the whole field of organizational behavior, which I more or less was on the ground floor of. Now, I don't say I'm the father of organizational behavior, but I'm one of the founders of organizational behavior, starting with 1967, and then with my textbook in 1973. The second phase then was, again, OB mod, or organizational behavior modification, using behavioral psychology in the workplace. I was the first one to do that and have many first class, top tier publications using research to back up this whole area of OB mod. I still like it a lot, although again, that was way back in the 70s and 80s. Then that third phase that I told you most people don't know about is what managers really do, starting with those observational studies that we did using both qualitative and mixed method studies. And then, of course, now since I started this whole notion of taking positive psychology to the workplace, and specifically what I call positive organizational behavior, starting in 1999. So I've been at this now for 2.5, almost three decades. And I'm very proud of all these areas, but mostly, of course, now today we're going to talk about this positive organizational behavior. Now, this whole area of positive organizational behavior is a confluence of positive psychology. And I was on the ground floor of positive psychology because I worked at that top box there. I worked with the Gallup organization for almost 20 years. While I was a professor at Nebraska, I also was a consultant and what they call a senior scientist at the Gallup organization. And many of you hopefully heard of the Gallup polls, but they have a big consulting branch as well. And I was at the first conference on positive psychology, led mostly by Martin Seligman, who is, of course, known as the father of positive psychology. But I was at the first conference at Gallup in my hometown of Lincoln, Nebraska. And then while I was at that first conference on positive psychology, I had this epiphany, more or less, that says, wow, Fred, you should be using positive psychology in the workplace, because we had not been doing that up to the, in the 90s even. We were not talking about positive psychology. So it took me, a couple 3 years to get the first articles out on positive or organizational behavior, or what are called POB. So my first article was in 2002, and I had with my two sons another article, as well as with Carolyn Youssef, who was one of my doctoral students. And Carolyn has been a major co-author with me through the years. She's a professor at Bellevue University near Nebraska here. And she and I then had an article also that then led to both positive psychology and this positive organizational behavior articles in the Academy of Management Executive, to lead to what then I call psychological capital. And those articles first came out with the title in 2004, so over 20 years ago. Okay, now I'm not able to advance my slides again, whatever that means. Wow. Not able to advance my slides. Meryl, do you have a solution here?
I don't have any solution right now, but I'm thinking.
Should I go up
Let's
here
stop.
at the top? It says your screen sharing. Okay, here we go. Maybe it'll go now.
Okay, let's.
No,
Maybe you can try
advancing.
stop sharing and then resharing your screen. Just we did before.
So what do you want me to hit up here?
Stop sharing and then stop sharing screen and then share the screen. again.
Okay, I was just stopped.
It worked earlier.
And
Yes,
then
now again, share the screen.
sharing.
All right. Yes, click on the share button. Right.
And now I need to
Yes, you need to hit the
set up
first
my
button.
slideshow.
First button at the left corner, upper corner. Yes, that one.
And I'll see if
No.
we can advance that.
All right.
Yep,
Yes,
it's
it
working
worked.
again. Thank
Yes.
you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so now let's turn to positive psychology and the psychological capital. So I'm really an advocate of positive psychology. And the reason is because psychology has taken a scientific approach. And this Psycap that I've evolved out of positive psychology takes a scientific approach and draws from positive psychology. Now, that's not to say, and I want to make sure that we understand from the beginning, there are criticisms of positive psychology. A lot of people, a lot of psychologists, even let alone our people in organizational behavior and your fields, are critical of it because they don't feel it's too soft. And then there are these best-selling books like this Barbara Enrich here. She feels that she wrote this very popular book, best-selling book called Bright-Sided. She says, you know, in that undertitle there, now the relentless promotion of positive thinking, she feels has undermined America. So she feels, and look at how happy she looks, she feels that positive people are too naive and unrealistic. Anyway, she's made a lot of money off of that book, and it's very popular because now we have this whole notion of toxic positivity is now recognized that, you know, people are, you know, like this toes, painting your toes with all these emojis and stuff like that. So I do feel from the beginning that we have to realistically apply this positivity. And I say that because, again, I think like emotional intelligence didn't have the theory and research base that it needed. And it hasn't had the sustainability that I think it should have. So I wanted from the very beginning, when I was sitting there at that first conference at Gallup in 1998, that positive psychology is great, but it must be realistically applied. Not this, you know, I think everybody believes that happiness and positivity are great, but still, not only professors, but many people feel that this positive approach is just too fuzzy, too flaky to take seriously, too many balloons, too many smile face emojis, and it's not taken seriously. That's why from the beginning, I felt that we had to have a science of positive psychology and now a science of Psycap. Now, remember, that was 20 years ago when I started this. And I not only got all those Academy of Management Awards, mostly for my previous work, but I also, that last picture I showed you, I also got the Harvard Medical School Award for behavioral psychology, behavioral healthcare. So this positive psychology demonstrates the value of positivity over negativity, but not all positive. My friend, one of the founders of positive psychology, Barbara Fredrickson, who's a professor at North Carolina, she was at Michigan, University of Michigan, now she's at the University of North Carolina. Anyway, she uses this wonderful analogy that not all positive. So she uses this yacht or this sailing ship that the sail represents, you know, the sail, the wind behind my sail is the positive side, but it still needs a keel. So we still have to be realistic. If you don't have a keel under that boat, what does the boat do? Flops over, right? How do you steer that ship without a keel? You can't. So we still need the keel. And I look at that as the realism or the realistic application of this positive approach. And I attribute that to Barbara, who's a very well-known positive psychologist. So in other words, it's okay, and we still have to recognize people do have bad moods. Being sad is okay. Receiving corrective feedback is still important. But we still need more positivity and more positive approach to things. And again, the whole research and science of positive psychology has demonstrated the value of positivity over negativity, but we still need this keel, this realism when we approach and take advantage of the positive approach. So traditionally, we've assumed the paradigm has been, if we are successful, if we make a lot of money, then we'll be able to be positive and happy. Now, we've turned that paradigm into, now we say the reverse, i.e., in order to be successful, you have to be positive and happy. So happiness and positivity lead to success rather than just looking at success leads to positivity and happiness. So this is a new paradigm, a reverse paradigm here. And that's like the so-called Copernican effect. You all know that one? Old Copernicus, who was discovered that the sun, up to his time, up until the Copernican effect, the world felt that the sun revolved around the earth. And then we found out, no, the earth revolves around the sun. So that's the Copernican effect that we now have in this relationship between success and positivity. If you got any questions about that, we'll answer them at the end. But I just want you to know that that's kind of how we can think of this whole positive approach. So drawing from the positive psychology and the research, we now have what I consider to be a science of positivity. So we now know, 20 years after this all started, where positivity comes from, what impact it has, and how we can develop it. We have a science of that. And I can't emphasize that enough. Now, first of all, where does happiness and positivity come from? All right, we have an answer to that now. And it mostly comes from some of the work that Sonia Lyubomirsky, another famous positive psychologist at University of California at Riverside, she draws from many studies over time. Now, it's still oversimplified, but she's able to have this famous pie diagram of where does happiness and positivity come from. And it comes from, first of all, about half of it, 50%, comes from nature and nurture. In other words, it comes from our genes and chromosomes. In other words, our positivity, our happiness comes from our genes and chromosomes, about half of it. In other words, that's a big part of it. But look at here, circumstances, only about 10% is what the science says. Now, many people feel, well, income determines how happy you are. Income determines how positive you are. Well, there's plenty of studies that show, for example, millionaires on studies have been found to be no more happy than their people who work for them. That's just an example. Other common ways of where we get our happiness comes from where we live. Not true. The latest Gallup polls that we have show that the happiest countries in the world are not where you necessarily think. That includes my own country, the United States. On the last go round of polls of happiness of populations, the US ranks 24th, number 24. You know where the happiest countries? I'm not sure where Turkey is, but I'm sure it's higher than ours. But the happiest countries are those North European countries, Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Finland, not Russia, but Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden. Those countries are the happiest in terms of location. South American countries, even though their per capita income isn't very high, their happiness scores are pretty high. Even how we look doesn't matter that much. It doesn't matter if we're male or female, whether we're beautiful or not so beautiful. And even our age, how old we are doesn't necessarily determine how happy we are. So, taken together, our circumstances, which, the common man on the street thinks makes us the happiest, that's not true for what the data says. It counts, but only 10%. But what we really base our whole approach on is this intentionality, i.e., about 40% is self-determined, i.e., if we want to be happy, then we are happy, self-determined. That's the key theoretical foundation. Now, again, it's 40%, not as big as genes and chromosomes, and not as big as how we were raised as kids. And certainly, though, more so than our circumstances, is this self-determined intentions to be happy. And that becomes then our theoretical key to psychological capital. So here is the antecedents of Psycap, mindful intentions at 40%. Now, you ever heard of Abraham Lincoln? Well, he's the #1 founder of our country in the US here. And of course, my city of Lincoln is named after him. But Abe Lincoln said, and he had much, knowledge. He wasn't a scientist, but he had a lot of knowledge. Most Americans would agree, the most knowledge of any historical character we've ever had in this country. He says, quote, "Most people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be." Let me repeat that. Most people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be, their intentions. Not so much where their circumstances are, not how much money they have, and not even, of course, genes and chromosomes, yes. How you're raised, yes. Your culture, yes. But it's the intentions that are the key. So that 40% intentional choices are the key. The choices that we make, our positivity, our mindset is up to us. So I like this. We are both products, 50% genes and chromosomes and nurturing, plus 10%, we're products of that, but we're also producers of our positivity. We're producers of our intentions, what we make up our mind to be. Our mindset is up to us. And that's a key assumption we have to make when we take this whole approach, this whole positive psychology approach, and this, what I'm calling psychological capital approach. So here's what Psycap is. It's just taken off, as you can see from those, statistics I gave you on the citations of my stuff. And it's taken off up and away, research, practice, and all domains. As you can see, it's in business, it's in education, it's in military, it's in healthcare, and it's in even now sports. So it's taken off all across the world and in all domains of the world. Now, how is Psycap differentiated from familiar types of capital? this word capital is very, that's in the business school. That's what everybody's based their, finance courses or in how do we, leverage capital and all that stuff. Well, that's called economic and financial capital. And that's important in business schools. And that's what the accountants keep track of. What is our economic financial capital? That's what the finance department is all about in business schools. What do you have and how do you account for it? But then now, more recently, human capital is getting more attention. So our human resource area, what we used to call in my day personnel management, now we call it human resource management, and now we call it human capital. What you and your staff know in an organization, their education, their experience, that's important too. And so I'm not putting these down. I'm just saying that these are where we differentiate from economic and financial capital, human capital, and now even social capital. Who you know, your social network. We all know about the role that, is affecting our cultures across the world is this social capital, our social networking through our devices, including this one that we're on here today. And that's why I'm behind times, because I can't do this very well. But that's just taken off across the world, of course. And of course, we now think, especially in the US here, we think it's affecting our youth to a very not a good degree, because all they do is, they're on their phones 24/7. So that's an important part of capital as well. And how you get a job is through social capital, your social network. But we are now saying that psychological capital, our intentions, our choices, our resources for our level of positivity, who you are, and who, importantly, you can become. That's what, psychological capital is. So it's our resources in our psychological resources, not our social resources, our network, not our, education, not our economic and financial, but our psychological intentions, choices, resources for level of positivity, who you are and who you can become. So it's like, psychological resources to draw from. We draw from and leverage, just like money in the bank, and how we leverage those psychological resources. But importantly, Psycap is not personality traits. It's not attitudes. It's not character. These are other things that are popular even right now in our field of organizational behavior. Not that these are wrong, but they are, in my opinion, not as important as the psychological. Character, strengths and talents, nor cognitive, emotional, like I said earlier, emotional intelligence is popular, but not really scientific enough for me. Or even some people talk about cultural intelligence, especially in international management. So I like all of this stuff, but importantly, it's not the same. It has discriminant validity, meaning that it's different from economic capital, human capital, social capital. And it's not the same as personality or attitudes or character or strengths and talents or cognitive, emotional, or cultural intelligence. So that's the background, okay? Now, my psychological capital or Psycap, I set up from the very beginning in 1999 when I first put this together. Must meet my scientific criteria. And those scientific criteria are fourfold. Number one, it must be based on theory and research. Okay? That's where I think, again, I learned from emotional intelligence. They didn't do theory, and they didn't do theory building, and they didn't do research to support their, hypotheses. Secondly, not only does Psycap have to meet the criterion of research and theory, but secondly, it must have valid measurement. So my measure, which is used throughout the world to measure Psycap, which I have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of requests for. And the reason I know this is because you got to go through permission, but no charge, through Mind Garden, which is then provides the permission process to use my valid measure. And we've done all the bells and whistles on validating our criteria are met. So it must have not only based on theory and research, but have valid measurement. Thirdly, it must be open to development. So that's the third criteria. It must be open to development. That leaves out personality. We can develop personality up to about, give or take, 30, 35 years of age. But after that, you don't change personality traits. And if you try it, it's not very successful. So I even tell my students all the time, I say, when you meet someone that you feel you're going to marry and there's some flaws in their personality, and you say to yourself, well, I can change that. No, you can't. So the point is that in Psycap and how it differs from personality traits is it must be open to development. So it's state-like. It's not it's not like a change in mood, but it has ability to change and develop. And then the fourth and final criteria, because I'm still a management professor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a management professor. And the reason I like the fourth criteria is that it also must have impact on desirable outcomes. And that's where the business school in me still comes out. And that's why I think it has sustainability, is because Psycap, in order to be considered a criteria of, it must have desirable impact. So again, those four criteria are: number one, theory and research; number two, based on valid measurement, not just some, hokey internet measure, but a validity measure in the academics literature, all the bells and whistles for validation. And number three, must be open to development through training and development and workshops like we're going through here today. And number four, must have desirable outcomes, but all kinds of desirable outcomes, not just in terms of profits of business organizations, but also healthcare outcomes. Harvard recognized me for. And I'll get through and all these things throughout the rest of the session here this morning with you. Now, what met those four criteria? The one in positive psychology that came out very strong, that met those four criteria, were hope, and simply put, having the will and the way. So hope is based on the theory, mainly in my theory, of Psycap. Hope comes from Rick Snyder's work, who has a 500-page book, big thick book, just on hope theory. And he's also now deceased, unfortunately, but a good friend of mine. And he also has not only the theory of hope, but he has some measures of hope. Then he has workshops on building hope, etc. So hope met the criteria for being a Psycap, one of the Psycap components, resources that we have. Efficacy. I'm mostly concerned with efficacy because that's where most of my own personal research has come from. And I have meta-analysis that show that, self-efficacy has tremendous impact on those four criteria that I just went through with you. So it's basically having the confidence and the belief. And that's a very important, in my opinion, the most strongest Psycap resource is efficacy. And then resiliency. And everybody's concerned about resiliency today because we live in such a complex environment, changing environment. And with COVID having worldwide impact, et cetera, we have to be resilient, bouncing back and beyond. And again, resiliency through the work of like Ann Maston has shown that it meets those four criteria that I just went through with you. And then finally, optimism. And I actually like optimism least, but I like all four of these meet the criteria. And again, Seligman has most of the work done on learned optimism. So it's made up of both positive attributions and future expectations that things are going to be better. Now, I like other things too. I like courage, for example, as a, positive, but it doesn't have the measures that I like. I like being, wisdom, but gee, how do you measure wisdom? We don't have research on that. And so these four have stood out to meet the test of my research over 20 years now. And of course, what does that spell? HERO. I didn't set it up that way, but that's the way somebody said to me. Actually, I came up with, gee, these four, four separately, but together they spell out hero. And that, of course, and then puts kind of the marketing on this whole stuff. Everybody loves the hero within us, HERO. And who's this guy? Nelson Mandela, right? So I think he's my hero. I've spent a lot of time in South Africa, and he's an example, maybe the best example for me anyway, is Nelson Mandela, who overcame apartheid and had the Velvet Revolution in South Africa. Not that there aren't problems, but he's certainly went through a lot being in prison and all. So anyway, this is what my Psycap is. It must meet the scientific criteria. So over the past 2 decades now, we've built this evidence-based credibility in academia and in practical application. So the empirical work is drawn from and applied in every type of organization and every location and culture in the world. So that's why I like going to Turkey. That gives me credibility that I'm teaching Psycap all over the world. China, sure, I'm all in China all the time. I'm in Europe all the time. I'm in South America, not as much, but I've been there. And I've been there in Turkey. So you're now going to be one of my examples of where we're doing Psycap. So all kinds of domains, all kinds of jobs in that left picture, and then all kinds of places in the world. This happens to be in China. Now, here are some of the examples of the research that we've done on Psycap and some of the applications and places where we've done it. First of all, US, Asian, and European organizations with thousands of requests, tens of thousands of requests for my Psycap scale. We've done work and research with sales, bank employees, aerospace manufacturing. I'll go through that in a little bit more depth in a minute here. We've done a lot of work at the Boeing Corporation. I used to brag about Boeing, not so much anymore. They've had some problems, as you may have heard. We've done it with entrepreneurs. We've done it with insurance services, white collar, as well as team level in banks, the military, operations and maintenance in manufacturing. Domains all over the world. I've done it with restaurant chains, service organizations, and then a wide cross-section of organizations with their research that, not as strong, but still we do a wide cross-section of organizations. And now today, healthcare, the uniformed services, education, and sports. These are the most recent. domains that we're using Psycap in. In other words, I hope that by this kind of graphic, you can see that we've done every type of job and every type of organization across the world. Now, importantly, and why Harvard likes me so well is that we have meta-analysis on all this stuff. Because in the health field, you have to have a meta-analysis. You can't just base it on 1 or 2 studies. So we do have a meta-analysis that my former doctoral students, James Avey and Becky Reichart, have done, published in, again, the academic peer-reviewed journals, in this case, HRD, Human Resource Development Quarterly, and others have now done meta-analyses, excuse me, where we have academic published research support for this evidence-based Psycap. Our meta-analysis had 51 studies, 12,567 subjects in the meta-analysis, and the most recent analysis done by a couple of Australian colleagues of mine in Australia, but across the world, they've done this huge meta-analysis with the same results that we have received. Hundreds of studies. And our meta-analyses of all kinds of research across the world relates to performance on average 0.3. Now I use this 0.3 to show you it's not 0.9. It's related, Psycap is related to performance on average about 0.3. That is statistically significant and do get through the peer review process in the academic literature. And of course, in the attitudes and behaviors, it's a higher relationship, about 0.5 or 0.6. And now, of course, with well-being, which is taking over even from performance. But we always say performance and well-being. And we have the meta-analysis to prove it. So in the published academic journals around the world, we have represented examples beside relating to performance, satisfaction, commitment, organization, citizenship behavior, which are some of the common, dependent variables in research in our field. We now have the higher the Psycap, the higher the well-being, mindfulness, engagement, ethical climate, hardiness, humility, voice, safety, justice, trust, etc., etc. We have all kinds of studies showing the statistical relationship between Psycap and all these desirable outcomes, which is, number 4 on my criteria that has to be there for Psycap. And then, of course, it also has, the inverse relationship with substance abuse and the use of scripts. Work-family conflict, the higher the Psycap, the lower the work-family conflict, the lower the depression. Even with, cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, we do as well increasing Psycap as the CBT people do in the field of mental health. The higher the Psycap, the lower the burnout, emotional labor, stress, negative affect, incivility and harassment, which is a big problem. But the higher the Psycap, the less of sexual abuse there is and harassment and incivility. The higher the Psycap, the lower the turnover, absenteeism, etc., etc. In other words, this is all documented, evidence-based. Now, how can we develop Psycap? So I've hopefully given you what it is and the research on it. Now, how do we develop it? Which is the third criteria that it must have. And believe me, it's easy to develop. We've done it. We've done experimental published research proven to be open to development in the academic literature again. And we have meta-analysis showing the development and training of Psycap that it does work. We can develop it. relatively easy. And also we can show not only the correlations, that the higher the Psycap, the better these outcomes, but also we have experimental studies that show if we develop Psycap, we can cause performance to improve through experimental and longitudinal studies and designs. Now, here's an example of a dollars and cents bottom line impact that we had a big study at Boeing Corporation in Seattle, Washington. One of my former doctoral students and a major contributor to Psycap is James Avey. Before he got his PhD from me, he worked for Boeing Corporation in Seattle, making all the big airlines. And so on the 787, which is the so-called Dreamliner, we did a Psycap study. And here's what it amounted to. We did utility analysis to determine the Psycap return on investment, the ROI, in building the 787 at Boeing. So we took my good friend Wayne Cassio, who in my opinion is the best HR professor and expert. We used his formula for utility analysis in a training program that we gave to Boeing. The number of participants, in this case, we used 74 engineer managers, assumed a conservative 1-year impact, etc. The relationship between Psycap and performance we found to be 0.33, excuse me, which our meta-analysis indicated was about average, not high, not low. And then we took two times the salary, which these guys were making $100,000 a year. So 200,000 for the benefits and indirect expenses. And then we did the program and we were able to increase their Psycap, not by much, but significantly by 0.015. We stick it into Cassio's formula, and I'm not going to go through all that with you, except to say that it's how do we calculate return on investment? Benefit over value added minus cost over cost, right? That's finance 101. Your finance professors will tell you that, right? Okay, big deal. And of course, we have the numbers to plug in to find out exactly what is the return on investment of this program that we gave at Boeing. And the answer, 270% return on investment. Now, the finance people will tell you the rule of thumb is that if you can get better than the cost of the money, the cost of the program, right now the interest rates are about 10%. So if you can get better than 10%, you should go ahead with the project. Well, we've got 270% return on investment by doing a Psycap training program and have the numbers to prove it, the dollars and cents. Well, of course, that just took off across the world then. So, for example, this is in Jakarta, Indonesia. They wanted me over there, put me on a billboard to draw in people in Jakarta. And wow, they paid me a lot of money as opposed to the Academy of Management. They don't pay me anything. But you notice a couple things in this background of this billboard that we took this picture of in Jakarta. It just happened to be there. Serendipity. The hero. That was just on the side of that building. And then you see the A&W root beer sign there. That's an American, soft drink in Jakarta there. And you notice the traffic as well. This is the program I gave in Beijing. This guy here is my translator, but he was also one of my doctoral students. Wei Zheng Li is his name. And he's a very successful businessman in China. And he was my, I can't read Chinese, but underneath there it says, psychological capital, mastering the art of happiness. That's how the Chinese translated it. Laylock, you can read that Chinese up at the top there for us.
Yes, exactly. It's just to say how to invest the capital to make the all Chinese be happier.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
The Chinese make it simple. But they really appreciate it, and I appreciate them. I did a program recently for this guy was called the Battery King of China. And I looked him up online. He's worth 24 billion US dollars. 24 billionaire. Okay, here's some simple tools for development of positivity in Psycap. First of all, it says simply shape how we interpret situations, such as up in the upper right-hand corner there, the glass is half full. We interpret situations, positively, as opposed to the glass being half empty. That's the simplest, right? But here's something I want you to take away. When you're faced with a conflict of any kind, just ask yourself, is this an inconvenience or a tragedy? And guess what? 99% of the time, it's an inconvenience. And therefore, you can deal with your stress level and so forth by, answering that simple question. This problem I'm having, this conflict I'm having at home or in the workplace, just ask yourself that simple question. Is this an inconvenience or a tragedy? Now, someone who has a severe illness or something like that, yeah, that's a tragedy. But most often it's an inconvenience, and therefore we can take it down a level in terms of our stress level. Okay? Now, again, that 40% that we went through earlier for self-control, we can develop to be realistically hopeful, efficacious, resilient, and optimistic. In other words, be a hero. Follow the simple rituals, habits such as at least two. You ever heard of PIFs? Pay it forward per day. Do at least 2 PIFs per day. Gratitude, stuff like that. And to get yourself to remind yourself to do at least 2 a day, we have people put 2 rubber bands on their left wrist. And then when they do one, they take it and remove one of them and put them on the right wrist. Then toward the end of the day, they look down, gee, I still have a rubber band on my wrist. I better do another PIF just to get people to, do it. Instead of just talking about it, you actually have them do it. And of course, always give recognition. That comes from my behavioral management days, my behavioral OB-MOD days. Give recognition. Always value the process and always value others. Never walk by someone without recognizing them, even with a nod, let alone how you doing today type of recognition. Always give recognition. So in a restaurant, for example, when a waiter waits on me, I always say, wow, you are a great waiter. You are a great waitress. You are a great server. And you know what? Oh, thank you. And their face lights up. And guess what? I get good service then. So just always use those kinds of rules of thumb. I always tell the waiter, you are, unless they're terrible, then I won't do it. But if they do anything that's worth mentioning, I will say, you are really special. Thank you. They feel good. Oh, thanks so much. And I feel good because the look on their faces, helps me. And then just simple daily rituals, one that I've developed called Get Positive, GET. G stands for gratitude. Make gratitude a habit. Attitude of gratitude. Keep a log at night of, I'm really thankful. And you can repeat, I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for my boss. I'm thankful for my what I read today. Keep a log and repeat at bedtime if possible. So have an attitude of gratitude instead of always complaining. E, you got to do exercise. the physical part of it. Do at least 45 minutes of physical exercise every day. You know, you take a walk. You have two doctors. You know what I call them? Everybody has two doctors, Dr. Right Leg and Dr. Left Leg. You with me? So you all have at least two doctors, and you got to do that physical exercise. I have a recumbent bike in my bedroom that I do while I watch TV. You know, I have no problem doing that, but I have to keep moving. Even at my age, I still have to do it. And then the T is spend quality time with family and friends and relax. You got to relax once in a while too. So get positive by daily ritual of gratitude, exercise, and time with family and friends. So that's as simple as we can make it, but it works. This stuff works. So how do we keep the sustainability of it all, though? In other words, yeah, you see this, these are kind of a couple interesting points, but how do we keep it going? Well, first of all, you have to have this foundation of positivity, and we have this POB.org, POB.org. So write that down and go to that website that we have. And also doing training workshops like I'm giving you here. Get my book, Oxford's 2015, Oxford University Press, thin book. You have to have understanding and development. This keeps sustainability. You also then have to have boosters though. So you need coaching every once in a while to keep this going. There are, develop video games, use apps, gamification, inspirational YouTube videos. You all know about TED Talks, right? There's a lot of TED Talks out there, and I've got some of my stuff on YouTube as well. And then, of course, use the reinforcement. Like I said, recognition is the best reinforcement. It costs you nothing, but you got to have those boosters to keep up your Psycap for sustainability over time. And then, of course, that positive support in the role of others as leaders, team, and family. So there's this contagion effect, becomes self-reinforcing sustainability from back to your work team. And I can't underestimate the importance of family to get this contagion effect. So I love, as you can tell from the beginning of our talk here today, I love family. And you need family, and you take care of family. So this is how you get sustainable development through this process. Education, boosters, and contagion. Here again are just some, and we're almost done here now. Here are some of the things that we've actually done, that I personally have worked with on the evidence-based applications of Psycap. I've worked with NASA on the Mars mission down in Houston in what is called, National Aeronautics Space Administration. I showed you on the 787 Dreamliner. I've worked with Burger King, their whole food chain, fast food chain. Worked with the U.S. Army on PTSD. I've worked with Harvard Med on concussions and oncology issues. Shell and DuPont Oil, DuPont Chemical, that Indonesian marketing firm, the biggest marketing company in Indonesia, and then China Mobile, et cetera, just to let you know that we do have a lot of application. Now, here's the future directions where I think you as academics can do things. Keep building theory and research refinements. Using alternative measures to our PCQ. We now have an IPCQ, which is, for a new measure that we have using MRS rather than fMRIs. fMRIs have some issues, but Harvard's using these MRSs, which are much better measures. Levels of analysis. We're going to away from just, individuals to Psycap being a collective Psycap and an organizational Psycap. So levels of analysis, qualitative and mixed methods. I had a colleague here for years called John Cresswell. John has got the leading book in mixed methodologies, not just statistical methodologies, but mixed methods with qualitative and quantitative. One of my doctoral students specializes in qualitative methodology, Ivana Milosevic, using coaching and other sustainability tools built into the HRM strategy. More domains and applications like we're doing with sports and education, healthcare. Focus on a balanced approach. This is my latest article that I think Meral has given you opportunities to download that newest article on, well-being and the good life using an expanded version of balanced Psycap and balanced human cap. So read that and keep up in the academic literature. Okay. So the guidelines for self and team balanced approach, Psycap plus social cap plus physical cap equals performance, well-being, and what we're calling the good life. So we got Psycap, social cap, and health cap, physical cap. Now here's what we presented at Harvard, and this is the last thing we're going to cover. Psycap in cancer patients, there's an inverse relationship between a cancer patient and physical effects. The higher their Psycap, the less physical effects they have. In research, documented. The higher the Psycap, the less the psychological effects, depression, PTSD, anxiety, hostility, anger, dysfunctional marital relationships, social isolation and identity. And then finally, even we have beginning evidence that the higher the Psycap, the mortality rates and even suicide rates are lower. So that's why Harvard Med is interested in this, and why I'm interested in them, because they have these big longitudinal studies that are available to them that we can add Psycap to their research that they're doing with their meds and their surgery. We also have this, psychological impact. But of course, like everything else, we have to be realistic and understand that in the cancer area, it depends on the moderators, depends on their type of cancer and the stage that they're in, whether it's at diagnosis, during treatment, or rehab. And again, whether it's recovery or recurrence. So this is just an example of where we're moving with this stuff. I'm very, very, I think I've got the backup for it all with this research that we're doing. Oh boy. That's my phone now. Yeah, Kyle, I'm on the presentation here. Okay, I'll hang up right now. Bye. That was Kyle. He said you didn't have to answer. So anyway, he's a wonderful son. Okay, now we're showing impact on these kind of cancer and AIDS and deployed soldiers, and all of this stuff is happening right now. shows the higher the cancer patient's hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism, the lower their depression and anxiety. There's a Harvard study that shows that optimists are 13% less likely to die from cancer. Measured Psycap of those with HIV and AIDS negatively related to depression and addictions, i.e. actual Psycap measures of those who have HIV or AIDS negatively related to their depression and addictions. And I'm doing a lot of work with the military, and my colleague on that, POBI.org, Julie Broad, who also is a frequent co-author of mine, she's doing a lot of work in Washington, D.C. with the military, and we're finding that soldiers who have negatively related post-deployment PTSD, depression and addictions. That's a big problem in the U.S. military, and I was a guest in the Turkish military as well. And most importantly, in this health issue, there's no stigma using Psycap. No stigma using Psycap in the mental health area, and it's easily developed. So, you know, all the stigma issues are evaporate with the hero within us. Who's going to argue with that? Who's afraid to find that out? Okay. So positivity in general and Psycap in particular, we can now be on top of the world, and may the Psycap force be with you. That's it for me. I now have some opportunity to ask, you can ask some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Luthans.
Thank you, Meryl, and thanks so much for putting up with me.
Please. I mean, you have actually reminded us how little things can make us happy and
Well,
positive.
thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
really. I mean, also you have reminded us the fact that happiness is a choice that we make. We should make.
Yes. We
And
can
now
either choose to be happy or we can choose to be a grouch.
yeah. So we can have questions. If you would like to ask something, please use the raise hand button.